Rory Stewart, of course, is one of the most remarkable, the most romantic figures in British public life. A man who was tutor to Princes William and Harry back when the princes were talking to each other. A perambulator across much of Central Asia, an imperial plenipotentiary in Iraq, a professor at Harvard University, an incredible curriculum vitae, a man who seemingly could do anything. And then in 2010, Rory, you became a Tory MP. And you were a Tory MP for the next decade. So a decade that witnessed the Scottish referendum, the Brexit referendum, the absolute triumphs of British statecraft and politics that followed the Brexit referendum. And then in 2019, you were defenestrated by Boris Johnson. You stepped down, a hiss from the audience, which is so telling, because here we are in, I guess, the heart of Remainer, liberal, Brexit-hating Britain. And I'm guessing there probably aren't many other men who served not just as a Tory MP, but in the Tory cabinet over the past decade who would get that many cheers. What is it, do you think, about your record that gets you those cheers?
I have no idea at all.
Such modesty.
I have no idea at all. Thank you all very, very much for coming. I mean, one of the things that Tom's pointing to there is that I've been thinking a lot, obviously, and you're all sitting on a very uncomfortable book, which is about this subject. But I've been thinking a lot about that period from 2010 to 2019, and I'm going to tease Tom a bit about this because, as you'll know, Tom is a very significant, very serious historian, and I feel that period was a moment where a lot changed, not just in Britain but around the world. That it was the moment where we moved from the kind of world of the liberal centre, the world of the 90s and the 2000s, which felt like the end of history, felt like that we knew what we were doing with economics, we knew what we were doing with politics, we knew what we were doing with international relations. And the whole thing fell to pieces. And about halfway through my time in Parliament, 2014, 2015, we lurched into an age of populism, which flipped all of that on its head. And we're still dealing with the fallout of that. We're still working out how we emerge on the other side. So I'm going to try Tom this. Do you buy into this influence of
Rory,
historical epochs?
I'm the one who's the interviewer here. But, well, yes. I mean, and so obviously we are here because you have written a book, Politics on the Edge, a memoir from within, which has yet another brilliant picture of Rory as a man of destiny on the front. This is you're striding across in Penrith, aren't you? Two rocks, which was your constituency.
Yeah, I'm basically about to fall off between two bits of the wall of Penrith Castle. Yeah.
Right. Well, so you talk about. I mean, because for me, the genius of this book is that you were simultaneously, a massively heroic political figure, doing your best in the face of much obstruction to do right by your ideals, by your country, by your constituency. And yet so much goes wrong. And so there is, just as you were striding nobly, and yet there's the risk that you fall flat on your face, that combination of political high achieving, the nobility, the romanticism, combined with the potential for pratfalls, is what I think makes this one of the great political autobiographies, not just of recent years, but probably in the whole span of British history. I think people will be reading this book for decades and perhaps centuries to come, because it is a brilliant portrayal, not just of the inadequacies of British politics at the moment, but of a crisis in the whole of Britain. Now, I'm guessing that you would probably agree with that summation of your own book, would you?
I was going to say, this is pretty high praise coming from here. One of the things that's difficult about writing this kind of book is that you're writing about colleagues that you're working with very closely. And I worried about this a lot. I've been brutally rude about Boris Johnson,
Okay,
about Liz Truss.
let's come to that, because you are unbelievably rude about them, and it's great fun. And let's let's save it, and David Cameron as well. Let's save that up for later to ensure that no one slips off for a drink early. But yes, you are.
But it's a problem, because, as you can imagine, all of you will have close colleagues and friends, and it's tough writing about things, many of which are private. I'm discussing what it's like to be in the tea rooms. I'm discussing what it's like to be in private meetings. I'm touching even on what's going on around the cabinet table. And the question I had to ask myself is it justified? Am I betraying these people? And is there a reason to write this brutally and honestly? And I think in the end I decided that I didn't want to do this to people who were not right at the top. So I've been quite careful to protect the identities of civil servants, for example. But with the senior political figures, I think it's necessary. I think that a democracy requires people to know what is going on behind the doors of Westminster. Otherwise, you can't vote. You can't make decisions. And I feel that a lot of political memoirs are too polite. They are written by people who don't want to hurt other people's feelings, or may even be trying to plan a political comeback, and therefore they pull their punches. And I think it's necessary for us to see just how much of a mess we are in.
Right, so you are indeed, I mean, you are very rude about a lot of the prime ministers that you have served under, and quite rude about a number of MPs. I mean, there's one extraordinary portrait of a fellow Tory MP who threatens to punch you in the face if you take his seat, which I'm dying to know who that is. Maybe you can tell me in the interval, because I doubt you're going to tell the audience now who he is. But would it be correct to say that among the list of people who register failures is yourself? Because among many other things, this book is a portrayal of your own doubts, your own inadequacies, your own inability to measure up to your ideals.
Absolutely. I felt that just as I am talking about the way in which politics was bad for people, it was particularly bad for me. The person I really came to despise as the years went on was myself. I felt that I was becoming, that it was bad for my mind, it was bad for my body, it was bad for my soul. I was becoming less honest, less thoughtful every day. It's like walking into sort of Chernobyl or something, the experience of being a politician. You just feel the kind of corrosive impact. And some of it was very humiliating. I went in as somebody who felt that I'd had a reasonable life before politics. I felt reasonably self-confident. And within 5 years, I found myself sending sort of creepy little texts to David Cameron saying, "Congratulations, Prime Minister, on your speech." Right? Desperately trying to get promoted. I'd become this sort of awful kind of creep at the back of the schoolroom.
But bearing in mind that by your own standards, your political career ends in failure. You don't stop Brexit. You don't stop Boris. You get chucked out. Who is to blame for this failure? Yourself, the Tory party, the British people? Where does the balance of blame lie?
Well, I think I think when you failed, it's pretty dangerous to blame the system and not blame yourself. So I can see very clearly now that I could have done much better in that run against Boris Johnson, for example. It was not just that the odds were stacked against me. I was too humorless, too pedantic. I thought it was enough when I was campaigning against Boris to keep banging on about facts. If you see me in the final TV debate against him, I'm saying, "But Boris, what is GATT 24?" Right? This is literally no way to win a political election. And I should have been much more optimistic about the future. I spent too much time criticising his Brexit proposals, not enough time producing an optimistic vision of where we could go. And I wasn't good enough at building a team of supporters years in advance. I came to it very late. I started running really because I tried to persuade other people to run. I tried to persuade Amber Rudd to run, Nicky Morgan to run, David Gauke to run. I even tried to persuade Ken Clarke to run again. And it was only when I'd failed with all of that, about 2.5 months before the due date, that I actually put my hat on the ring. And by that time, Boris Johnson, Dominic Raab, these people had been campaigning and raising money for close to a year. So I could have done much better. And it's pretty humiliating failing in politics, because you are basically being rejected by the British people. That's a lot of people saying they don't think you're suitable to be Prime Minister. But I can assure you, being rejected in favour of Boris Johnson, that's a humiliation beyond anything you can imagine.
Rory, you know what it was. You didn't wear a tie. That was the terrible mistake. You took it off. So this discussion of failure, and I think this is one of the great studies of failure, but it's a study of failure in which it is about the individual, it's about the party, it's about the political frameworks, but it's also about the country. And in that, I was reminded of two great writers, both of whom write about spycraft, spooks. So your dad was in the Secret Services, and it is said that you were as well. I'm not going to press, because obviously I can't, again, that's not a topic I can expect you to talk about. But the first one is Le Carré, and would I be right in kind of identifying his influence on your style in this book, and the kind of the tone of anger and despair in it?
Yeah. I mean, how many people in this audience have read John Le Carré? I don't know, half the audience. Okay. So I love him because I think for those of you who haven't read him, I really encourage you to read him, or watch the amazing performances of people playing George Smiley and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. He is describing not the James Bond vision of espionage. And I think, in a sense, a lot of writing about politics is a bit kind of James Bond. You know, we all go to school and we all have posters on our wall of Nelson Mandela or Gandhi or John F. Kennedy in black and white. And we think that politics is this kind of amazing, noble, glamorous thing. A bit like you might think being a spy is a bit like being James Bond. And what John Le Carré does is he takes you into the heart of 1960s, 1970s Britain. You get a sense of things not working. You get a sense of people trying hard. You get a sense of failure above all. And I don't know anybody who is able to describe the British government, British bureaucracy, with the skill and the attention that John Le Carré brings to that.
Okay, so, but there is another more recent spy writer who you also reminded me of, and it's very appropriate that we bring him up, because his spy novels are set in a crumbling office not far from the Barbican, and this is Mick Heron, who has written a series of novels centred around this crumbling office, which he calls Slough House, and it's a dumping ground for failed spies, ruled over by a kind of brilliant Dickensian grotesque. But one of the central figures in it is the grandson of a distinguished British spy, with a man with high ideals, a man who feels that he's been raised for great things, and who for no cause that he can be blamed for, ends up in this dumping ground where he is set to ludicrous tasks. He has dreams that are tramped on and stifled. And this guy, River Cartwright, seemed to me your most vivid fictional avatar. I mean, I can't put you, because you haven't actually read them, but I urge you to go and read them. And the reason that it particularly reminds me of it is that your portrait of how you have to become an MP, and then the indignities that you suffer as a backbench MP, it's like being dumped in Slough House, it seems to me. Tell us just how bad it is. First of all, trying to become an MP, and then the indignities that you have to go through as an MP.
Well, I think the first thing to understand is that if MPs seem weird, it's partly because of what they have to do to be selected. Most MPs, to have a chance of being selected, have to start by serving as local councillors. They have to spend a lot of time specialising basically in delivering leaflets through doors. So they're experts on how to avoid getting your finger caught in the letterbox and how to avoid the teeth of the silent dog snapping at you. They then are, if they're lucky, are past the selection board and are allowed to apply for seats. And they can be rejected for a very, very long time. Michael Howard, who was the leader of the Conservative Party, I think, tried for a seat for nearly 17 years.
And Rory, this is true of Labour as well as
True for Labour as well. Yeah, there's a very good book by Isabel Hardman on which describes some of the process of becoming an MP. True for Labour, true for Lib Dems, true for Conservatives. There was a guy that entered the House of Commons with me who was, I think, 65 years old and had served as a local councillor for 40 years before making it. And the first, if you get a seat at all, generally you get a seat that you can't win. It'll be a seat that's controlled by the opposition, and you have to move there. So traditionally, if you were a up-and-coming Tory MP, you'd move to Wales or Scotland to a Labour-held area. If you were a Labour MP, you'd move down to the southeast of England. You'd leave your home, you'd leave your family, you'd leave your job. You plod round for a year and a half, and the party in the modern world micromanages every moment. They check every press release that you put out. They insist you go around campaigning for other MPs. They interfere in your leaflets, and you don't get elected. And then you try again 5 years later. So by the time people are in the House of Commons, they've been through a sort of hazing process. It's a kind of Stockholm syndrome. And the more brutal the parties are to them, the more brutal Labour is to them, the Conservatives are to them, Lib Dems to them, the more they feel there has to be something great about it. Instead of resenting the parties, they sort of feel an obligation to, that their sacrifice must be somehow justified. That's the first problem. And then the second problem, of course, is when you get into the House of Commons itself, where it becomes immediately obvious that the whips and the ministers and the government want to break you. They want to make it clear that you are nothing. You will vote with the government whip 3-4 times a day. You will always do what you're told. You will always go out and read the party lines. And there was a guy called Archie Norman who came into the House of Commons who had been the chief executive of Asda. Right? So he'd been a really major, big figure in British business. And I remember talking to MPs, older MPs in the tea room, who were like, we showed him, I don't know who he thought he was turning up in the House of Commons. You know, we made him wait before he got a job. We sat him at the most junior table in the tea room. It's literally like a completely malfunctioning 1920s boarding school.
Well, you have so... This is such a beautifully written book. You describe the House of Commons as a chamber of hungry ghosts. And that sense of mingled desperation for promotion and impotence is a kind of shadow throughout the entire book. And so the implication of that is presumably that you are not getting people of high caliber, and you're also not getting people of a broad range of experience. So on one level, you are not getting, for instance, to take an example at random, somebody who has walked across Afghanistan or administered in Basra or taught politics at Harvard. It's very difficult for him to become an MP, even though, not absolutely impossible. But it's also very difficult, say, for people from a working background, manual labourers or whatever, to get into the House of Parliament. And so presumably this is a crisis for everyone, because it attenuates the blood supply of experience that should be animating the limbs of Parliament.
100%, yeah. This is very important. One of the reasons that Parliament is not more diverse. So in 1980, well over 150 MPs came from blue-collar working-class backgrounds. They had been steel workers, they'd been coal miners. Today, there are very, very few. Most MPs are now professional politicians. They're people who've been special advisors, they've been councillors, and that's partly because you can't afford to spend 7 years really not earning much of an income trying to get a seat. In the past, the trade unions obviously supported people to do this. And then there were other people. The Tory party obviously had a lot of people who came in with private money. But now in the modern world, you've created a very, very odd group of people who have to support themselves by working inside the party. And so they are absolutely trained in the party mindset.
And the knock-on effect of that is that when, in turn, you get promotion to the cabinet, who is it who describes the condition of being a cabinet minister as one of learned helplessness, which is a kind of terrifying description of running one of the great offices of state, that there is a kind of premium set on incompetent amateurism. Would that be going too far?
100% again on that. I mean, so Philip Lee, who was an MP with me, pointed out that he'd waited, I think, 7 years before he got his first job. And he was a doctor. And all he wanted to be was be in the Department of Health. So they put him in the Ministry of Justice. And then they took a lawyer and put him in the Ministry of Health. Right? And this is partially deliberate. The whips don't want people who know too much about subjects. When I was finally appointed to the Foreign Office, I went in to see Boris Johnson, and I said, Boris, thank you. So I was going in for the slot below him, the deputy slot, the Minister of State slot. I said, which are geographical. So I said, whichever part of the world you give me, I mean, I think I can be most useful in the Middle East and Asia because I have spent 15 years working in those places. I've just been the Middle East Asia Minister in DFID. I speak 3 Asian languages. I've written books about the Middle East and Asia. And he said, Africa, Rory. And I said, Boris, I literally know nothing about Africa, nothing at all. And he said, come on, Rory, what's the capital of Kampala?
But again, but just to play devil's advocate, you go on to become Minister for Prisons, and you know nothing about prison, unlike certain MPs. And this actually turns out to be your greatest success. You get on top of issues. You confront the prison establishment blob, and you force through changes that you are proud of. So maybe there is potential for cabinet officers, for ministers and people in the cabinet to grow.
Yes, and that's true. I mean, strangely, the most satisfying job I had was as prisons minister. I really came to love prison officers. I actually really came to love prisoners. I really enjoyed working with it, partly because it is such a disgrace. It's so shameful, the situation in British prisons. You feel from the moment you arrive that there's something to be done. The cells are filthy, drug-ridden. People are crammed, 2 people into a cell that the Victorians built for one. Violence had tripled in 5 years.
And drones. You seem very
flying,
obsessed
a lot
by
of drones flying over.
Yeah.
Yep. But prison officers getting 10,000 assaults a year. People getting their eyes cut. I mean, so I really felt there is something I can do here. And what I can do is to try to make these places a bit safer. And it was the beginning of my really understanding positively that being a politician is different to other things. I think because I'd been a civil servant, I had thought until then that being a political minister was like being a senior civil servant, that you needed to sit down with people, you needed to argue every point, you'd sort of look into the details, and that never worked for me. It didn't really work for me in environment, didn't work for me in Middle East and Asia, didn't really work for me in Africa. Suddenly in prisons, I realized that to get something done, you have to take risk, and you have to go to the public. The power of the politician lies with the public. And so in that case, I gave a BBC interview, and I said, I will resign unless I reduce violence within the next 12 months.
Which, as I gather from your book, this wasn't pre-planned. You just suddenly found that you'd said it.
Yeah, I was impetuous. Yeah, I was impetuous. But as soon as I'd said it, everything changed. The department woke up in a completely different way. We set up an ops room. We began focusing on 10 prisons. We set up a standard coachings team. We were able to get onto the landings. And violence, finally, after 5 years, came down. And I was very, very proud of that. But it was a very strange lesson for me, because here I am attacking populism, attacking slogans. But actually I got it done because I produced a slogan.